a little Torah study. Um, out of curiosity, I wasn't sure what y'all studied last week. Was it the Parsha, or was it Torah, like Esther, or what was it? Douglas, I see you're saying something, but you're muted.
Nobody remembers.
No one remembers? Okay.
I'll try and find it.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Because if you don't remember, then it doesn't matter anyway. David, what were you going to say?
No, I think I wasn't there, but I think it was supposed to be Steve, and then at the last moment he couldn't do it. So Rabbi David's did. So
Right.
maybe that refreshes people's memories. It was Rabbi David's. No, I have no memory of this.
Okay. Well, that's okay. That's okay. Regardless, I was just curious. Just don't want to be redundant. So the question that I wanted us to start with, just for you to think, you can answer if you'd like to, but you also can just have your own thoughts about it. What is it for you that keeps you up at night? What are the thoughts that come up? Is it more personal, right? Is it personal life? Is it local? Is it global? Yes, we got Douglas, go for it.
It's awful. I go to sleep at night thinking about things that could happen. Go to sleep at night thinking about things that happened when I was so young. Nobody remembers anything except me. And what would I've done differently? These are things I did in elementary school, junior high school, college. I got eaten up a couple of nights ago by a nightmare of working at my job. And it was just bad. So anyway, I have to listen to something to get my mind off of that stuff.
Absolutely. So right. So it sounds like thinking of things from the past, things that you wish you had done differently. Okay, great. What else? Yeah, Merle?
I think because I'm over compulsive, I worry about what I have to do the next day.
Okay.
And part of that is dealing with my health issues, which aren't horrible, but I make them over compulsive wise. And so I'm always thinking about, do I have to help our kids with the grandchildren, or do I have to be someplace for Arnie? It's just and it starts about 4 o'clock in the morning with my thought processes.
Great. So that's more. So what's coming up?
Right.
Are you going to be prepared? Are you going to
right.
be on task?
What do I have to do to be ready at what hour?
Great. Cindy, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, I think the state of the world scares me. Just so many innocent people, which includes Israelis in Gaza and Ukraine, and now the Moscow people who just went to the theater for the evening in Haiti, and everything. I mean, our election, no matter what side you're on, is very controversial. It's going to be ugly, though. I think the two sides battling each other. And AI with so much false information out there, and people, it used to be seeing is believing, and now with Photoshop and AI, it isn't. And there's just so much false information. What is the world going to be? And things we don't know, like COVID, who saw that coming, and how that changed. Of course, we wouldn't have Zoom if it wasn't for COVID.
Right. Great.
The state of the world scares me.
Right. And especially all these fears that are out of our control, and you have no idea, like, especially a lot of the things that you listed were, it sounded like it was sort of like, we don't even know about it. What even is coming and what might happen and who saw this coming? Great. Well, not great, but yes, not a good answer. Any other thoughts? Okay, so then my next question, with all these things swirling around in your mind, what do you do to resolve or at least address some of those anxieties?
Okay, I'll jump in and I'll tell you what I do.
Okay.
I visualize a big hall, and all of these thoughts are people, and they're all standing up and they're all shouting at me, and I'm sitting up at the table in front with God on one side and advisors on the other side, and telling them individually, shut up, I'm in charge here, and you don't get a chance to speak right now. So everybody just goddamn sit down. And a lot of times that just does it. And like I said, I listen to stuff going to sleep. I don't wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning thinking about stuff. I have trouble going to, well, it just starts coming as I'm going to sleep. So anyway, there's my solution. I have to shut up the committee.
Yeah. Great. And that's sort of like a mental trick you have, right? That you've figured out a way to kind of create a scene in your mind that you can then manage. Okay, great. Great example. Merle?
I'm trying very hard not to listen to the news.
So blocking out some things that you know are going to be bad, negative influences.
I know I'm trying to block out things that I know that are going to really upset me. And I mean, I worry about, I'm not so much worried about my age group. I'm more worried about our kids and grandchildren. And how is everything going to affect them at some point?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I try to block out as much as I mean, I know it's wrong to not listen to it or read the newspaper or whatever, but I try to not pay as much of attention as I used to so that I don't get as upset by it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that that's necessarily a bad thing, right? I think there's a difference between, willful ignorance and trying to avoid all the bad things in the world, and also knowing your limits and what is going to be helpful for you to know and understand the world, and what's just going to be noise that's going to add to it. Okay, great. Any other thoughts? All right, great. So I'm sure everyone has their own coping mechanisms and ways that we get through life. So we're in the midst of Leviticus. So Parshat Tzav is the portion this week. And parts of Leviticus can be a little challenging for us as modern people to understand. There's a lot of things about sacrifice and the blood and the livers and all these things. But I want us to kind of get a little bit into the mindset of why people were offering sacrifices. What was the purpose? What was the role? What was it doing for people's lives? And I think that we might actually find that we have more in common with this kind of practice, because sacrifices were ultimately the way that people engaged with God, the way that people were able to communicate with God during this period. When we think about the word for sacrifice in Hebrew is korban, like the verb is lehikriv, it has to do with nearness, and it's all about drawing God near, drawing ourselves closer to God. And I think, and ultimately what our ancestors were doing, were trying to address the things that were scary and the things that were concerning and the things that were meaningful in their lives, and communicate with God about those things, to resolve those things. That's my hypothesis in any way, but that's what we're going to take a look at today. So I'm going to share my screen for us to look at. There's a few different, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Hold on. So we're going to look at a few different, so in this particular Parsha, we hear about a few different kinds of offerings, like sort of categories of when you would make a sacrifice, when you would make an offering for something, and then the laws around it. But I want us to think through, like what's the reason for the offering? What might the person who's making this sacrifice be trying to communicate, to resolve, to work through in their own life via this sacrifice? Any questions to start? All right, great. So we're going to look at this first one. Does someone want to read this for us, please? Merle, go for it.
Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons thus. This is the ritual of the sin offering. The sin offering shall be slaughtered before Adonai at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered. It is most holy. The priest who offers it as a sin offering shall eat of it. It shall be eaten in the sacred precinct, in the enclosure of the tent of meeting. Anything that touches its flesh shall become holy, and if any of its blood is spattered upon a garment, you shall wash the bespattered part in the sacred precinct. An earthen vessel in which it is boiled shall be broken. If it was boiled in a copper vessel, the vessel shall be scoured and rinsed with water. Only the males in the priestly line may eat of it. It is most holy, but no sin offering may be eaten from which any blood is brought into the tent of meeting for expiation in the sanctuary, and such shall be consumed in fire."
Great. So this is the first offering that we're hearing about. So this is yes, Cindy, you have your hand raised.
It just almost makes me laugh, like where they decided that killing an animal is a way to please God, when really, in essence, it was a way to get food for the priests.
Well, so yes and no, and that's a great point, because that's part of the whole priestly system, was that because the Levites had no way of getting their own food, this was how they ate, right? Like there was a portion that the rest of the community brought, but the priests existed, right, to offer this particular service. This service being, so we look at
No,
those.
I'm confused that they think killing an animal is a way to please God.
So I want to offer two thoughts. One could be to please God. And then the other question that I want to raise is, what was it doing for the person who was making the offering? So here's what I want us to look at real quick. So this is called the sin offering. So the word in Hebrew, I'm scrolling up here, is hachatat. You can see right over here. Chatat. Does that sound familiar to anyone from other contexts in Jewish life? I'll give you a clue. I'll hit my chest and I'll say, Al chet shechatanu lefanecha. Right? So Yom Kippur, right, when you're doing the vidui.
Yeah, a sin. Al hate. The hate is the sin.
Exactly, right? The hate is the sin. Does anyone remember? So this is we'll see who's been paying attention on Yom Kippur. What is like the sort of understanding of hate as sin? Like there's a more literal translation.
Something that you shouldn't do.
Well, something that you shouldn't do, but hate is a particular term.
Missing the mark.
Missing the mark, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Susan's been listening very closely. Right. And so this idea of sin is that a hate is an archery term, and it means to miss the mark. Penina, yeah?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I am totally amazed the way they're trying to instill cleanliness, and whatever it is that's going to be good for you at the time, the best that they can provide ways to do it. they start with something that it's kind of like you have to do it because of God wants it, but it's not all, but they are actually achieving some kind of habits that actually are very practical. You are told even to wash your clothes. And this is something that maybe they never really thought about it before when they were traveling, and how to treat the piece of meat that you're going to eat so you're not going to get sick. So practical things were like developing, or practical habits were developing from something that they actually in the beginning were told to do it as a must, as a mitzvah, and to instill it in them. But if you look at that, I'm amazed of the practicality of those things. What is it that they're really learning here? They're learning that they have to wash their clothes. They're learning that they have to be careful of what they eat. And I'm always like amazed at when I read things like this at the Bible, that things are, people think that it's just, some people, I'm not saying everybody, think that it's like a bunch of laws. But I'm looking at, look how much they're learning here. This is amazing to me.
I think, right. I think, and we see this as well, that there's rules in terms of how many days
this is
you
how
can
you
go
impose
without
it.
eating it.
It starts as a rule, but it's actually something that benefited them physically,
Right.
mentally, the whole thing.
Exactly. So here's what I think is interesting for us to notice, that we also hear, right? So if blood is spilt, you have to wash only in the sacred area, only in the sacred precinct. You can only eat it in this area. And also, and all the priests, only priests can eat this because it is most holy. So this thing that's holy is the thing that someone who is bringing a sin offering, someone who has made a mistake, who has made an error in some kind of way, is bringing this offering. And that's the thing that is most sacred. So if you are someone who is, the word has just escaped me. I've committed a sin, right, a chet, and I want to address that. What are the things as a human? Let's assume I'm an empathetic human being who caused some kind of harm and wants to make good on it. What am I trying to? What do I need to do to address that?
You're creating a purity to cleanse yourself.
You're creating a purity, okay, to cleanse, right? What else?
Consideration to other people, maybe.
So
that
you might
shouldn't catch diseases from one another, because we knew that they recognized that they separated the people who were getting sick from the healthy ones. There is a lot of stuff that's
well, hold on. We're not there just yet because that's a separate thing. That's important for sure. We're not there quite. David, did you have a hand raised?
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute. What strikes me is that the sin is dealt with in one line, and the step system by which deal with the sin is dealt with in 15 subsequent lines. So maybe an answer to your question is, if you have a sin that you're conscious of, you have to go through a step system that somehow straightens you out relative to the community.
Perfect, right? Like there's and this is ultimately what the sacrificial system was it was a mechanism, right? It was a way to respond to something, to do something. And right, so we say, okay, you're going to have a sin, and then here are the ways and here are the next steps for how it's going to be handled once you show up to fix it. So it's a very clear line of action. Great. Jonathan, you have your hand raised?
Well, yeah, so I was going to add, or I was going to say, I don't know if, so this offering, the male priest, which is, a descendant of Aaron, gets to eat some. So I don't know, since there's no females getting to eat this and there's no Levites that aren't priests that get to eat it, I don't know if, like feeding the Levites is really a justification for like this particular offering. And then also there are a lot of offerings like the burnt offering. I don't think anybody eats any of that. I'm not really great on all the offerings, but I think the drink offering, you just pour that out. There's a lot of offerings that you don't eat. And the ones that you do eat have to kind of be eaten by the right person in a certain way. So I don't know if that's really like the point of it is to make sure that the Levites get fed. And one of the things that like hits me when I think of this, all the offerings and the amount of blood and everything and suffering that goes on, it's sort of like forcing you to acknowledge that when you sin, whether it's an unintentional sin or a group sin or a major sin, or they have all different types. But particularly with these animal sacrifices, you have to acknowledge that when you sin, you're actually causing the suffering of the innocent. That this is sort of that you're acknowledging a kind of a destruction that you're causing here. But then by saying that the suffering of this innocent animal is actually, what fixes everything, it's sort of like saying that your acknowledgement of, the suffering that goes on when we sin seems to be enough. Like, you don't necessarily have to go out and do all of these other things, but that God wants you to just recognize that, when you do wrong, then somewhat, a person, an animal, yes, but a person who, as a shepherd, you need this animal to live. That's, your food, that's your wool. And then your male, your perfect male, that ensures the future of your flock, so it's sort of like the most valuable thing you have is a living, innocent person. And you have to harm it in order to sort of recognize the effect of your sin, I guess you could say.
Right. So I think, you made a lot of points there. Great. So I think that, right, like there are many different kinds of sacrifices, some that were meant to be consumed, some that weren't meant to be consumed, some that were consumed by the Levites' families, some just by the priests. So you're noticing something important here, right? Like, since it's only being eaten by the priests who are serving there because it can't leave the sacred precinct, this is something, and they're saying that, this is most holy. This is an especially sacred, and by sacred, like in Leviticus, sacred is kind of like, it's almost like, I always think of like Raiders of the Lost Ark, that there's this element of the sacred is this really powerful, potentially dangerous force that needs to be carefully dealt with. Not that it's meant to harm you, but it's so elevated and so powerful that you have to be very careful how you deal with it. So this kind of offering that's meant to address one's sins, right? That's meant to be, to make up for some wrong that someone has done, is like that sacred and that powerful, as opposed to a different kind of offering. And the other element too, that I think you're right. I don't think it's meant to be, sacrifice was never meant to be about like suffering or showing violence, but it was about making something visible that was invisible, right? You can't necessarily see the harm that you cause someone, but when you're repairing it, you're have this physical representation of the harm that you caused and your desire to repair it. Okay, so I want to skip down because I just want to make sure we get through. I see some hands, but I just want to make sure that we get through a few other things. So that was the sin offering. So that was hachatat. That was the sin offering. So then we have this next offering for a different issue. Does someone want to read this one? It's a little gory. David, you want to go?
This is the ritual of the guilt offering. It is most holy. The guilt offering shall be slaughtered at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered, and the blood shall be dashed on all sides of the altar. All its fat shall be offered, the broad tail, the fat that covers the entrails, the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is on them at the loins, and the protuberance on the liver, which shall be removed with the kidneys. The priest shall turn them into smoke on the altar as an offering by fire to Adonai. It is a guilt offering. Only the males in the priestly line may eat of it. It shall be eaten in the sacred precinct. It is most holy. The guilt offering is like the sin offering. The same rule applies to both. It shall belong to the priest who makes expiation thereby.
Great. So, whereas the chatat, the sin offering, was boiled, right? That's what it was talking about, cooked in vessels. This is the guilt offering, which is like a barbecue, right? It's cooked on the open fire. So I want us to go to, so what's the difference between the guilt offering and the sin offering? So if we go to the Hebrew, we see that this is called Torah ha'asham, the asham offering. Does that ring any bells?
Yeah.
Think back to Yom Kippur.
Ashamnu, bagadnu, chatanu, avinu. It's a
Right.
part of I call it the thinking part. I think the whole idea is to make them, to teach them how to think. To think it not like an animal. You don't just kill and eat. That's the whole purpose of the law, of the whole thing. It's not for, I don't like a if question. I'm looking at that of what is it that they really want you to do here. They want you to think, to be, how would you say, to be able to separate of what it is that really you want to do and why. And this is very important. We think it's just a matter of being like a, like a nudnik. You going, like you want to be somebody who's going to nag them all the time about little things. No, it's everything. It's to make you stop and think. Don't act like an animal in a herd. Take charge, judge, separate, think, decide, feel. You know that giraffe is kosher? You know why nobody kills it?
So hold on, Panina. I don't want to go too off the.
No, I'm just saying because they don't know exactly where is the point where they should slaughter the throat of the giraffe to know that this is the kosher part. They don't know which one it is. So because they don't know exactly in this long neck where it is, they don't kill it. But it's a kosher animal. Just trying to tell you that the whole thing is to make you
Panina, I gotta time out. I appreciate what you're sharing, but I wanna move us back over here. So
okay.
So asham. So right. So this is like the idea of ashamnu, of having guilt, is connected to shame, to embarrassment. And so that's what this guilt offering is meant to be. So it looks a little bit different. So again, you're coming and you're making an offering for some kind of, error that you have made. So the first one, and I was looking this up. So the chatat you give, this is something that the error was something that you knew was wrong, but you weren't thinking. You weren't necessarily intentionally trying to inflict harm, but you knew that what you were doing was wrong, and you just weren't conscious and you weren't thinking and you did it. And then the asham offering, the guilt offering, is when you didn't know that something was wrong when you did it wrong. So with that, there's kind of that like lack of knowing. And it's an interesting distinction, right? Between like, what are the things that like we knew better and some of the things that we didn't know enough yet to know that we, and that's the difference, right? Like if we want to think about the difference between sin and guilt, that there's different levels of severity around those. But even still, this is something to repair something that's been broken. It's to address. The question that I'm curious, that I want us to get to as well, is that for you as a person, like, let's think like psychologically, let's think spiritually, emotionally, when you do something wrong to someone, or you do something wrong, you commit some kind of error, what are the feelings, the thoughts that you have that you need to address?
Hopefully you realize it, you need to address the person or whatever you did something wrong to.
Okay, so going to the person directly.
Yeah. To apologize and make amends if you can.
Right.
Apologize and make amends.
Well, contrition is another one. You first have to recognize the sin that you did. Well, assuming that if we're doing the hatak, which was unintentional, then you may not recognize it. And then the second step is to try and rectify it with the person whom you treated unfairly or whatever. And then I guess you ask God, this was, this, God, this was unintentional. I didn't mean it. Yeah.
Forgive me.
And didn't we in a prior parsha deal with treatment of unintentional sins and in the justice section as well, and those that were intentional, and there's a different punishment meted out for both of those. So intentionality factors in.
Absolutely right. And so there's a whole series of different laws for how do you treat a murderer versus someone who committed manslaughter. And there's a big difference, right, between those two. I saw that Benjamin had a hand raised, and then we'll go to Rebecca.
Well, I was thinking one wants acceptance of the apology from the offended party. I'm sorry, and that they sort of accept that you're sorry and can move on.
You're right. You want to be absolved, right? You want it to be okay. Especially I think if it's a heartfelt apology, right? You don't want someone just to blow it off. Great. Rebecca, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm just going to say exactly what Ben said, in that there was someone in my family that kept trying to apologize to me, and I kept turning away and walking the other direction. And then I finally read something that in Judaism, if a person makes at least 3 attempts, then they are absolved of that guilt. Or
right. If someone attempts to apologize 3 times with genuine contrition, they are absolved, and the person rejecting the apology gets the sin. Yeah.
Right. So then I ended up apologizing to the family member.
Yeah. But there's also a really important acknowledgement there that sometimes you're not ready to hear an apology, and sometimes you need a little bit of time. And Judaism also pushes you to say, and at a certain point, if someone is being genuine, you have to let it go. Right. Yeah. And I think the other, any other thoughts? I think as well too, something that people are trying to address, because right, absolutely, you have to fix the thing with the other person. And we hear in the previous parsha, for the sin offering, it talks about the offering that you give, but before you go to give the offering, you've gone to apologize to the person and make good to the person that you've harmed, and only then can you come and bring the sin offering. So it's those 2 things. But I think sometimes too, and I'm thinking something, if I can use Douglas as an example, what he was saying of sometimes thinking about things that happened in the past and things that we wish that we had handled differently. That sometimes we really have a hard time. We really have a hard time like letting go of certain things and holding ourselves. We want to hold ourselves accountable, but sometimes it can still haunt us a little bit. And so I think part of what these offerings are meant to do is give us a mechanism, as David was saying, right? A series of steps, a mechanism to resolve our own feelings about things that we did wrong, so that we can ultimately move forward. Susan, yes.
Yes, I have a question, and this has always gotten to me when they describe the fat, the tail, the entrails, the kidneys, liver, and the protuberance, which comes a lot. And I'm thinking, why are they going through all this detail? And one thing that I read, I don't know about the fat and the tail, but the kidneys and the liver were used for divination, I think, the liver in Egyptian society. So they are, is that correct? That they include some of that to burn up the kind of the divination devices that they had in the prior society.
It's definitely possible. Inspections of different organs was certainly a part of ritual sacrifice in a lot of ancient communities. I'm not sure, and to be honest, it's hard to know exactly why the liver and kidney was burned. It's very possible that it was to keep people from committing those kinds of things. But with a lot of sort of the specific rituals of the sacrificial system, we don't quite understand it at this point, because it's a bit arcane for us in those details. Brad, you have your hand raised. Could you want to unmute?
Rabbi, I hate to make you backtrack, but I feel like I missed a beat here. Who is the sinner? Is the sinner an individual? Are we talking about communal sin? Are we talking about the sin of the priest? Who is the sinner here? And is that made clear in the Torah?
It's a great question. So in this case, it's an individual. It's any person as part of the community. There are other sections when we hear about communal sin and if a priest sins. But this is for your average person who's going about their life. But it's a great question. All right.
So the individual, I'm trying to understand how this works.
Mm-hmm.
The individual confides in the priest, and then the priest on the individual's behalf goes through this sacrificial process. Is that your understanding of the way this worked?
So not quite, but what you have to start with, so it's not the priest, it's the individual. It's me saying, I screwed up on this thing, I messed up on this thing, and I need to repair it. So I apologize to the person that I harmed, and then I have to show up to the priest, to the temple, with my animal for slaughter, right? With my chicken, right? And then the priest is going to do the ritual. But it's a great question, actually, right? That it's not that you confide in the priest and then the priest tells you what to do. It's saying to the Israelites, to the individuals, when you make a mistake, here's what you have to do. So it doesn't put the impetus is not on the priest to tell the person that they messed up and they have to fix it. The individual has to do it on their own. And then the priest does the sacrificing for them. But they have to show up.
We're not in the Holy of Holies at this point, where only the priest has access. Is that correct? If the individuals were somehow outside of that sacred space?
So there were different...
in a sacred space, but not the most sacred space?
Correct.
Is that what's going on here? I'm sorry to belabor this, but
not at all. So we can think about, the temple, or this was, at the Mishkan in the tabernacle, in the wilderness. There were, it's like concentric circles of holiness. The most holy on the inside. So you have sort of like the outer area, the inner, you come in, and then there's there's more and more inner courtyards, basically. So there were different areas where different Israelites could be. And the Holy of Holies was only the high priest went into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. So these were the secondary or tertiary holy spaces, but still the designated spaces where sacrifice could occur. It's a great question. All right, so I want us to roll down to the third kind of sacrifice that we hear about in this portion. So those first sacrifices were things when you did something bad, when you had something to make up for. But then we hear about a very different kind of sacrifice. Does someone want to read for us?
I read it.
Okay.
This is the ritual of the sacrifice of well-being that one may offer to God or not. One who offers it for Thanksgiving shall offer, together with the sacrifice of Thanksgiving, unleavened cakes with oil mixed in, unleavened wafers spread with oil, and cakes of choice flour with oil mixed in, well soaked. This offering, with cakes of leavened bread added, shall be offered along with one's Thanksgiving sacrifice of well-being. Out of this, the person shall offer one of each kind as a gift to Adonai. It shall go to the priest, who dashes the blood of the offering of well-being. And the flesh of the Thanksgiving sacrifice of well-being shall be eaten on the day that it is offered. None of it shall be set aside until morning. If, however, the sacrifice offered is a votive or a freewill offering, it shall be eaten on the day that one offers the sacrifice, and what is left of it shall be eaten on the morrow. What is then left of the flesh of the sacrifice shall be consumed in fire on the third day.
All right, great. So this is the sacrifice of well-being. So we have a kind of general category of the sacrifice of well-being, and then the particular kind within that, which is called the Thanksgiving offering. So this is, if we look at the Hebrew, so the sacrifice of well-being is called hashlamim, right?
Wholeness.
Wholeness, exactly.
Shalom.
Right. Shalom, peace is ultimately about like that the word is connected to wholeness. Because that's when we're at peace, is when things are completed, when things are whole. And then the Thanksgiving one is hatodah, right? So if we think about like even how you say thank you in modern day Hebrew, todah, it's thanks, right? It's offering gratitude and appreciation for something. So what do you all think? So how is this different from a sin offering, and what are maybe some of the reasons you think someone might offer a well-being or a Thanksgiving sacrifice?
Well, I don't know where they say where you get the blood, because all they're talking about is the unleavened cakes and oil and wafers and flour and the like, which is different from, and then they go to the priest will go dashes of the blood of the offering.
Mm-hmm.
So where do they say it should be a cow or a chicken or a dove? I just see that it's now,
yeah, it doesn't quite say. These are the laws around sacrifice that we find in Leviticus are a bit convoluted. Like it's not totally clear what's happening in some of them. So sometimes we don't get the full picture of what the order of operations was.
But this has a lot of talk of how to if not cook it, how to prepare it for.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the question I want us to go to is, though, why do you think someone would want to offer a well-being sacrifice or a Thanksgiving sacrifice? What might have happened in their life?
Health.
Recovered from illness.
Recovery from illness.
Had a baby.
Had a baby.
Got married.
Got married. Is that a harrowing experience, or that's a grateful experience? Yes.
Grateful for something somebody did to you or for you.
Yeah. Appreciation. Panina, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I think it's to actually teach them what is it to be good for them. If it's good enough for the Levi or for the priest, it should be good enough for you. This is something that they have to learn how to treat whatever they are eating themselves, with a thought that it should be as good as the thing that you are going to give the priest. Otherwise, it's to teach you what is really the best for you. Why do they have to wait till the bread is popping up to be good? Because if you don't eat, if you eat it before, it's going to give you a stomachache. And same thing goes with the calf, and how well you burn it and how far you clean it. And it's all a method of inserting good decisions, good good, what's going to be good for them also. If it's good enough for the priest, then it will be good, also good for you. It's to learn to think way and before you start eating. What is it that you're really doing? How are you treating all this? And it's like, if it's going to be good enough for the Levite, then for sure you can eat it. That's my take on it. You have to teach them, חנוך לילד על פי דרכו. You have to teach a child according to what it is that he understands. The measure that you're going to teach a child is going to be special. You're going to have to do it in a special way. And they are doing it this way because the familiarity of sacrificing was they're familiar with those things. They saw it when they lived in Egypt. So they're trying to make it a little different. So think before you do it. It should be as good as what you give the priest. Then you do it for yourself. Because you have to remember they were slaves. They were, I don't even know what were they given to eat. Whatever it is, the scraps that they found. Now they are free people. They have to make decisions. And health was a very big thing in the Bible. If you're going to look through when Miriam got sick, they told them to separate her from the rest of the people. They're trying to take the priest as a measure of the plus. This is what's going to be good. And then you do the same for yourself. They share it later among themselves also. So that's my take on it. You have to start teaching them with what's familiar and then make it better. So they should see, right.
Thank you, Penny. Thank you. Susan, you had your hand raised?
Yes, I could substitute gratitude here. It's gratitude for ills that were avoided or taking bad things, for saving from bad things, illness, harm, and the like. But it's also, I think, teaching gratitude for the good things that you have in the life. And that's some of what you were asking, people were answering. Thank you for enabling me to have this wedding. Thank you for the baby. Thank you for this. And we say prayers before and after the meals. So, gratitude. We say prayers in the morning when we wake up. Prayers for the gift of life and getting through the night, which is for some of us is difficult. But anyway, I think it's a gratitude deal. And they're inculcating it in the Jewish people here to be grateful, I think.
Absolutely, right. That just as you're making an offering, you're trying to become closer to God, you're communicating with God when you've made mistakes and you need to resolve something, you need to address something. Also, likewise, when something is good, when something good happens, you want to engage in that spiritual process to acknowledge what's good and to show appreciation for it. Absolutely. Jonathan, you have your hand raised?
Well, yeah, I noticed one thing that was kind of interesting about the sequencing. So we've got the three offerings of the sin, the guilt, and the well-being. Sort of mirrors some of our processes that we go through when we do wrong. So you do wrong, you first you just recognize that you've done wrong. That's your sin offering. And there's a dead animal there's blood everywhere, all of that sort of thing. Well, then the next thing that happens is you feel guilty, you feel bad because you did wrong. And if you look at that, the kind of one of the distinction about that offering is that you're parsing out this part is good, but the liver and the kidneys, and the fat of this, you need to get rid of that, and don't give that to the priest, et cetera, et cetera. And it sort of mirrors a kind of a process that we go through when we feel guilty and we're like, well, was I responsible for this? Was it my fault? Was it his fault? What can I do better? All of this stuff goes on. And then when you get to the well-being offering, you can add cakes and meal and honey and all of this stuff with it. And there's no dead animal there. It's sort of all of the things that you can do. Your acts of contrition or your apology and your acceptance of all of these things, all of these fruits that come out of the recognition of whatever you've done, finally go into this sense of well-being that you have when you recognize that you've done wrong, you parse through all of your guilt, and now you're providing your cakes, your atonement, your good work, all that sort of stuff. There seems like there's a kind of an entire process. The three offerings walk us through our process of what we go through, or what we try to go through, or what we should go through when we've done wrong. Like after we come to terms with our guilt, we then, in order to get well-being, offer these cakes and stuff, which are not actually, there's no suffering, there's no dying there, that sort of thing. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's a really nice interpretation. And I think too, like what I would add as well is that when we go through the process of teshuvah, the ultimate goal is to heal and repair and move forward. And so when we talk about well-being, right, this word here is shlamim. It's about completion. It's about wholeness. That our goal is not just to fix, not just to kind of deal with that. It's actually to learn from it, to grow, to move forward, to become whole. And that's part of that process as well. Nice. Brad, you have your hand raised.
Rabbi, why do you think there are both leavened and unleavened cakes? How are we to interpret that? I
do not know. I wish I had a good answer for you. I do not know. But it's very particular. And it's not always clear to us as we're looking at Leviticus now, thousands of years later, exactly what that was about.
It teaches us to wait and think.
Okay, so hold on, Panina, hold on. Rebecca, you had your hand raised.
Did the leaven and the unleavened bread relate back to when they had to leave Egypt, and that Egypt is a gratitude thing? It's a recognition of gratitude that they were able to escape Egypt, and so they eat the unleavened bread as part of the sacrifice.
Yeah, very, very possible. So what I want us to
that I got, but why the leavened bread?
A good question. What I want us to look at in our last couple of minutes. So these sacrifices were meant as spiritual expressions, right? Ways to engage with God, ways to resolve things, and also ways to address the feelings that we would be feeling as we go through life, right? Of the guilt of making mistakes, the hope for acceptance of our apologies, gratitude for the things that are good in our life, right? The sacrifice of well-being was also meant for someone who had gone through a harrowing experience, basically. So we were talking about, say for instance, childbirth, which is both the blessing of having a child at the end, and also in ancient times, incredibly dangerous. That there was no guarantee that the mother and the child would make it through safely. So having, going through childbirth, there was a real reason for joy and celebration and appreciation. So as well as other forms of illness, which again, in antiquity, you could get a cut, right? And that could get infected, and that could, right? There's so many little things could go wrong that people really needed to acknowledge, gratitude for well-being and healing and all those things. So as Jews today, we of course don't sacrifice anymore. But what we have to replace, replace the sacrificial system is prayer, right? So this is the way that we kind of address a lot of these things these days. So I had a couple other examples, but since we just have a few minutes, I wanted to go to one example of the sort of as Judaism moved away from sacrifice, an example of prayer that kind of addresses these similar kinds of things. So this prayer here that I wanted to include is called Birkat HaGomel. So this is a prayer that someone says after they go through some type of harrowing experience. So it might be after an illness, after surgery. People will say it, after finishing a round of chemotherapy. Women will say it after childbirth, at the bris, at the baby naming. And it's meant to be this prayer that acknowledges this scary moment and shows some gratitude for it. So what's really interesting about it as well is you have something that the person who went through the event says something, and then there's a congregational response. So the person who, so I'm just going to read through it quickly because I'm just mindful of the time. The person who experienced that, whatever that experience was, says, "Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who bestows goodness upon the guilty, who has bestowed every goodness upon me." The congregation then responds, "The Holy One has bestowed goodness upon you. May God bestow every goodness upon you forever." So what if we want to think about, like, what would that moment address? Like, again, kind of going back to that original question that I raised of, what keeps you up at night, and how do you address, how do you respond to those concerns, those anxieties? How might prayer or all those things? Well, I see Ben has a hand raised, so I'll go ahead and stop talking because he has a thought. Go for it.
Well, just when we were talking at the beginning about what people think about, it was almost like I could relate to all those that, oh, I guess it's normal to have those thoughts. So kind of an affirmation of normal behavior. But here it says everybody's guilty. Well, we're all guilty of something. So nobody is above seeking some kind of forgiveness. And then here God, or you're praying for, bestowing goodness on me, even though I too am guilty. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think it's meant to be a touch of humility, right? So you don't want someone to get up and just say like, "Oh, I'm so blessed. God saw me through this. How fantastic for me." But I think it's kind of getting up and saying like I'm a human being who has made mistakes like everybody else, but God saw me through this experience. Wow, am I grateful? Those are probably two different approaches. Panina, and then Merle.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think also you are, well, I sometimes think that I am required to be a doormat this way. Like, how much can you let people really be nice, nasty to you without you doing something to protect yourself? I mean, just constantly you're going to wait to say, "I'm sorry for something that I was mad at you because you did that terrible thing to me." You're not supposed to be a doormat. There is 2 sentences from Kohelet that says, 1, ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, and 2, haba leorgecha ashkem leorgo. Somebody who comes to kill you, you do it first. You don't let him. So I don't think that those laws prepared you to be always forgiving and always doing. It's just a matter of one way to cope with things, but on the other, it doesn't tell you that this is going to solve all your problems.
Of course.
So I think that if you are going to resent it because you feel that it doesn't fulfill what you need, don't feel so guilty, because it's only ways. It's ways that you need to decide by yourself which way to go. And the fact that they give you this kind of thing, another sentence, if this happens and this happens, it's fine. It makes you think. But still, when it comes to feeling, it's hard to take it and feel like that you are a sinner if you don't feel exactly the same way, the way they tell you that you're supposed to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is some sentences that tells you certain things you cannot repair. I don't want to give you examples because then I'm going to get political, and we're not here to get into politics. But yeah, I think a lot of people in this whole world are blind, and they want to be blind because it's comfortable. And you cannot feel guilty because you feel that it's something that they shouldn't be doing. It's play blind. That's it.
Absolutely. And I think, right, and there's the system that I think Judaism is trying to put in place for us is asking us to be accountable, to be compassionate, to be responsible.
And it's also make you think.
And not everyone unfortunately can live up to that. Merle, you wanted to share something.
I think when I read this prayer, I think that keeping the community, it says that the community is behind us and helping us with whatever help we need.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Right. That when you go through an experience like this, and again, like I think this is also part of what the sacrificial system is about. When you're going through something that's difficult, you have to leave your house, go to the priests, be out in the community, whether it's a sin, whether it's gratitude, whatever it is that you're offering, whether it's a holiday celebration, right? You have to go out and join the community. You have to go out and be a part of the larger people, rather than being in isolation. And I think it really forces us to go out and be a part of something bigger than ourselves, which in good times and bad times is really, I think,
If
really
it's
crucial.
Justifiable.
So,
if it's justifiable.
So I think
you cannot tell your heart or your brain. You can only tell it what it's a possibility, but it's not. Yeah, it's just to learn to teach you how to think. That's all I think. That's how I look at it. Teach you how to think.
Okay. Well, so it is 1:03, so we will wrap up for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining and for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom, everyone.
I hope you all can sleep well at night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Hope so.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Great to meet you guys.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work for everyone.
Yep.